Hello and welcome. It is so good to have Dr. Bird back with me again today. Hello, Dr. Bird.
Hello, Gallus Granny. Thank you so much for bringing me back. It's an
How
honor.
are you today?
Doing okay. Yeah, I thought I'd bring a little fun. I hope that's okay. Not too
That
much.
is perfectly okay. When I was trying to think of a title for this particular show, I was trying to think of all kinds of bird puns. Dr. Bird migrates south to my coop.
Oh, I
Or unlike Noah's raven, Dr. Bird returns.
oh, nice. I like that one. I like what you did. What did you say? Dr. Bird returns to roost or something? Hey, that was
Dr. Bird migrates south to my coop.
Oh.
But I
Okay.
didn't want to make it sound like I had captured you and you were not here of your own free will.
Thank you. Yeah, right. There was no coercion involved.
Hello to everyone in the chat. It is great to see Beck and Badger and Dog and Logan Fisher and Pragmatic Crystal. Welcome, all of you. I will probably be taking more of your questions and comments this time than I did last time because I don't have quite as much material to cover. But one thing I wanted to start with, and Dr. Bird is aware that I'm going to start with this, but she has no idea what I'm going to say. And that is what my biggest take was from this book. And here we go. First, the background. Before I read your book, having been a believer for 42 years, I read a lot of things on biblical marriage, especially biblical womanhood, which is really what more is brought into biblical marriage is biblical womanhood. The one that always stood out in my mind the most was Anne Ortland's Disciplines of a Beautiful Woman. Are you familiar with that one?
Actually, that's one I never heard of, or I got out before I got into that kind of, yeah.
That one is probably the worst of, one of the worst of the books that I've read. And even as a believer, I didn't buy that one because that one went through Proverbs 31 and teaching you how to be a Proverbs 31 woman. And one entire chapter was dedicated to making yourself attractive. And her argument was that there are 24 verses in chapter 31 of Proverbs, and there are 24 hours in a day.
Oh, stop.
And 2 verses deal with making yourself beautiful, your appearance. Therefore, all women should spend 2 hours a day working on their appearance.
Are you kidding me?
I am not kidding you. That was one of her arguments. And I looked at that and I said, you know what is never mentioned in Proverbs 31? Eating and sleeping.
Right? Exercising.
Exercising. So women
hanging out with your friends.
Do these things.
Right. Exactly. It's amazing, isn't it? The way people find to say what they want to say.
Yeah.
Justify what they want to justify.
Okay, so some of the other books that I read, Wayne Grudem's Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. I'm sure you're familiar with that one.
I am.
Jill Briscoe's book, although I don't recall the title of that one.
Okay.
And most recently, I got this one for doing an atheist Bible study called Ben's Bullshit Bible Study, True Woman 101. And I'm sure you know that all of these are god-awful. Yes. So as I approached your book, I was thinking, okay, I have read all of these awful, awful things about what it means to be a biblical woman and enter a biblical marriage. This is going to be a book that sets us straight, that tells us why all of those other books are wrong and all of those other books, just totally miss the point. And your book was exactly the opposite. It's that all of those books were not only spot on, it's worse than you think.
Yeah.
And so my takeaway from this book, from your book, was no woman in her right mind would enter a biblical marriage.
That's right. Yes. Thank you, Granny. Thank you. I've done a couple of things. I mean, just piggybacking on that with the new evangelicals. Are you familiar with those? With that group? Yeah, Tim Whitaker had me on, and I've done a couple of variations of why you don't want a biblical marriage. Right?
Oh wow, let me come on and talk about that.
Oh, he loves it. Yes. headed in that direction for sure, which is kind of cool. But yeah, he had me on to talk about biblical marriage, how awful it is, and how dehumanizing and objectifying and all the stuff. Yeah. So anyway, so yes, I am pleased. Thank you, Granny. When you first started saying that, I thought, wait, I hope I'm actually gonna. Yes, I actually affirm that they are being biblically true, right? With those awful, god-awful women's Bible studies, the fact that it's women's, yes, they are actually being fairly true to Scripture, and that's what makes it kind of awful. Yeah. Is what it says. Yeah. Oh.
Logan Fisher mentioned another, I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Yes. Did you let's see, I was trying to think of some of the ones that I did, Passion and Purity, was that one of them in,
I've heard of that one, but I've never read
Elizabeth?
that one. The
Yeah.
purity culture thing was a little bit after my time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was right at the it was right after me, but there was Elizabeth Elliot, I think, was the Passion and Purity. So basically wait until you're married and all the stuff. Yeah, and it turns out her husband was a gay man, a closeted gay man his whole life.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, just some awful stuff. But what were the other ones? Anyway, the ones that I did read. Yeah.
Logan Fisher asked, ever heard of the 7-day cycle guy? I have not either.
Do I want to? Are we better off for it?
And Dog says, a woman learning stuff from the Bible, despicable. And Logan says, I did Passport to Purity.
Passport to Purity? Is that a thing?
I guess so.
Wow.
I do know that I caught enough of the purity culture that I taught my two daughters, some of it.
You did.
We weren't all in. I mean, we didn't go with the rings and the vows and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But
the daddy-daughter stuff that creeps me out.
I do think one of my daughters did go to some kind of a daddy-daughter dance thing that was put on by the church, but I don't think they did any of that stuff there. I think it was just more of a daddy-daughter night. I don't know. I'd have to ask my daughter what it was like.
You should ask her if she's been to therapy over that.
She's a doctor now.
Oh, good. Is she a doctor? Yeah, you should laugh with her about that. Sorry, honey. We didn't realize it was kind of gross. Yeah.
This is an interesting comment. First time meeting Dr. Bird. She seems insane. My cup of tea. I love her.
Cheers.
So is that what you wanted people to get out of the book?
Yes. Yes, that is definitely part of it. I want people to be really honest about what's being said, and to open your eyes to how awful it is. Most of it, at least again, in terms of this topic. Yes. Right. It's women are property. I mean, so many things, right? I don't need to start listing. You were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say that I think it's just as bad for men as it is for women.
It is. Yeah. And which parts are you thinking of when you say that?
Well, I'm thinking, if a man is married to a woman who's under his authority, who's, subordinate to him, then he doesn't have a partner. He has a child.
Right. A dependent that is, yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I also don't think it's fair to, I mean, in this framework, to men who are required to be the bread makers, right? And there's points in time throughout history when that was maybe doable, but I think it's just as harmful and stressful in different ways, right? When there's that kind of pressure put on men. And I mean, to whatever extent I can, I really feel for men who are put in that, like the stress of, I don't really get to do what I want to do because I have to provide for all these people that we're creating and whatever. Yeah, it's not fair. I like that comment, though, that he doesn't have a partner. It's not fair to him. I like that. Yeah. So I'm interested in general in any topic related to the Bible. What I'm going to do with it is I want people to take it very seriously and stop finding ways to dance around the elephant in the room, or to stop pretending that that's okay. Or as you alluded to or maybe named a little bit last time with me, find a way to tolerate abusiveness, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Tolerate unhealthy relationships in the name of whatever, God, following Jesus, whatever. To stop doing that, right? It's okay. It's okay to just call it what it is.
Mhm.
And then figure out, okay, well, now if you really do need to still be obedient to the Bible, then what is that going to look like for you or whatever? That's it's not in my wheelhouse. My wheelhouse is making sure people are being really honest about what it is saying and trying to hold people's feet to it a little bit, who don't want to do that. Like, really, because you know why a woman's defiled? It's because a man's penis enters her. Like, let's talk about that. What's that saying about men's penises?
Did you hear about the pastor who called his wife his penis home?
Shut up.
He was
What?
dismissed from his church over it. It's Mark Driscoll.
Oh, he did not. He
Yeah.
is one of the most bizarrely. I'm just not even going to finish that sentence.
But he was so popular.
He called her that? Yeah, he could get away with that
did
stuff.
once, and he got so much
Pushback,
blowback on it that I don't think he's ever done it again. And it was funny because I went on his Twitter page on Mother's Day when he's happy Mother's Day to my wife, and I said, "Oh, you mean your penis home?"
Good for you.
And he blocked me.
Nice. That's kind of a fun badge of honor to be blocked by one of these people, right? What you do know that the word vagina actually means sheath in Latin.
Okay. No, I
Yeah.
did not know that.
Yeah, isn't that fun?
Mhm.
Yeah, isn't that fun? I don't like how many body parts of a female, and the thing is, I'm sure many males' body parts are also named for men, but there are several female body parts that are named either by a man or for a man's purpose, in light of their purpose for men. And it makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm just going to say it, Granny. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable and angry. Mm-hmm.
There's one comment I want to get to, and then I want to return to that topic.
Do you? Yeah.
Innocence is under attack, and you cannot win the battle with a single awkward talk or a strict set of rules. The primary defense for your child is a strong relationship with their parents and with God.
Do you mind leaving that up a little bit longer so we can engage that?
Mm-hmm. I'm a little confused by the comment because I know Logan Fisher. I don't believe Logan Fisher is a believer.
That was my thought. I was like, okay, so what's Logan actually getting at here? I think B is Logan joking. Yeah, I think he is.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, because I was like, that doesn't sound at all like the Logan Fisher I've heard of before. Yeah, okay.
Let's see. Okay, yeah, what I wanted to get back to was the verse in Romans where it discusses the natural function of a woman.
Okay.
I've always found that one of the most abhorrent verses in the Bible and have had it used against me a number of times.
I bet you have. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that.
Does that mean what it says? Is it really that bad?
I'm flipping to it because I think it's helpful. I imagine, since many people who follow you probably are kind of former, whatevers, many people are probably familiar with it, but I still want to read it if you don't mind.
That's a good idea.
Okay.
I'll talk for a minute while you look for it. But there are several people in the audience that are cradle atheists.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
So
sure.
You're right. It's a good idea for us to go ahead and read the verse.
Okay.
You got it?
I do.
Okay.
And I can't help but be a bit of a teacher right now. I'm so sorry. But this whole chapter, we're not going to read the whole thing, but it is interesting to read the whole lead up into it. And he's having this debate with people, like a philosophical kind of a debate. I also want to say that Romans is highly difficult to read as a whole. And it is the most debated, which tells me this is such a random tangent, but I do think he was losing his mind. I really do. And
interesting.
Yeah, and people are trying to make sense of stuff that doesn't actually make sense. So I throw that in there genuinely as a scholar that my next book is about Paul, and how I'm going to handle that is kind of going to be really fun. So the point, for those of you who haven't read this before, is this leading up to it. Like, we've got some really, really strong, awful, judgmental language in here before we get to 1:26 to 28, which is what is typically quoted at people who are trying to acknowledge the humanity in LGBTQ folks, right? Talking about the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness. And, some people are saying, well, Paul is being ridiculous and setting up this big, like almost a straw person, and then blows it all down in the next chapter. And I don't agree with that. So I think he's actually on some level agreeing with the judgmental things he's saying, even though he turns around in the next chapter and says, but none of us can judge, because Paul is repeatedly quite judgmental towards people in very dualistic and essentializing ways. Sorry for that. I just can't help myself. Okay. So here are the verses. Here are the verses that you were just referencing, Granny. I'm going to start here in 24. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the degrading of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, and this is where your question comes in, God gave them up to degrading passions. We can talk about this as much as you want. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural. And in the same way, also the men, giving up natural intercourse with women, were consumed with passion for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. Yeah. It just is so awful to me. Before answering your question, if you don't mind, can I just talk about it very briefly? I just want to highlight a couple of things.
Go ahead.
Okay. For this reason, God gave them up to degrading passions. Paul thinks that passions are degrading, period. It's not. Yeah, most people have no idea, right? And most people think that it's this layer of judgment on sexual acts or desires. He just thinks they all are. But at the same time, fuck you very much, Paul. Why are you calling passions degrading? Like, now everybody thinks through your lenses, right? So the judgment on passions at all is so offensive to me, and people have agreed with it instead of standing up to it, right? Mm-hmm. So so whether you're just saying that passions themselves are not so great, or whether you're referring to a specific set of the passions that some people have and not all, saying that sexual desires for someone of the same sex is degrading to the person, is a level of judgment that is just so deeply offensive and frustrating. Mm-hmm. Yes, he did. Agreed, B. I'd love to know what he never wrote about. That's awesome! Oh my gosh! I might have to have that cross-stitched on a pillow or something. That is so good.
Logan Fisher says, fuck you very much, Paul. Now that's something I could get behind.
Thank you. Really perverted yes.
Okay. And since I've got a comment from Logan, I want to go back to something that I got before, which was a clarification from Beck. Godless Granny, that was a quote from Passport to Purity. So that previous quote from Logan Fisher,
Logan threw out there was okay. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's good stuff. Thank you for clarifying all that. B, I also want to say, some people, and I'm among them, think that we should be reading the letter of Philemon through the lens of enslaved peoples were used for sex, and Onesimus's name means useful. I imagine many people here know that, but not everybody probably. And all the rhetorical moves in the letter, I think that Philemon, the letter to Philemon, is one that Paul didn't intend for anyone else to see, and it is very much Onesimus stands in for Philemon in a relationship between Paul and Philemon, and Onesimus is being used sexually by both men. I think that is very, very probable, almost certainty, because of the way slavery played out for humans in the first century, and the way Paul is almost mockingly referring to Onesimus as useful, and he's mocking this subhuman person, Onesimus, an enslaved person. So it's kind of an interesting thing that you said that, because I don't get to say it very often, because I'm too often around people who do still read the Bible and need it to be helpful to them, and it's too much to actually say that to them.
I totally get that. I
But
totally
it's
get
also true. So it's like, mm. So back to your question. Do we need it? Because I never answered your question about 26 and 27. Do we need it?
Mhm.
So Paul is saying God gave them up to degrading passions. So he's calling the passions themselves degrading, not necessarily a specific one. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural. And in the same way, also men giving up natural intercourse with women were consumed with passion for one another. And he's judging that, I think, so. Men committed shameless acts. Again, another layer of judgment that people have agreed with instead of stood up to with men, and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. Are they thinking of different types of STDs or that kind of thing that might have been more prevalent among people who did have sexual interactions with someone of the same sex? So your question was, what was your question about this?
I was thinking, I hope you remember. Okay. I did say, it talks about the natural function of a woman.
Mhm.
And I've been told, hey, woman, your natural function is to be a sex partner.
Mhm.
Is that really what Paul meant?
Oh, that isn't what he's saying, actually. I
Okay.
don't think that's what he's saying. I think hear me out. I should have the scholarship on hand. I will go find it again. But someone I respect has suggested that this is talking about people who are queer in some ways, who are enjoying each other. Some have suggested it might be taking place in temple worship practices, which I try to be very careful about stepping on into that. I don't want to exoticize other religious practices. I don't think it was I don't think it was as common as some people say. It may have been more common than some people say. The main thing here is that one of two things. One, she's strapping on a dildo.
Mm.
That's fun. um, or what's the other? Wait, hang on. Their women exchange natural intercourse for unnatural. So that they are in one way or another, a woman was choosing to be active instead of receptive and passive.
Okay. And we're going to get to that in
Okay.
just a minute. But before we do that, I do have another question along these
Yeah.
lines, and that
Yeah.
is, I have heard that in the first century, that it was that Christians were forbidden to marry because of Paul's saying that it's better for men and women not to marry, and so that a lot of people would get married and have a family and convert to Christianity after they were finished having children, because they knew that they were forbidden from marrying if they were a Christian. Is that true? Was that a practice?
There is truth to it to some extent.
Okay.
So the references there in 1 Corinthians 7, one of your favorite chapters, as I recall,
Mhm.
those are all, like he opens that what we call a chapter by referring to a premise that many people, as far as we know, were practicing, which is married couples were saying, "Oh, we're actually more holy if we don't have sex. It is better for a man not to touch a woman," because it's all about the man, right? It's not about a couple, actually, right? So the language of "it's better for a man not to touch a woman" is really about, we're hearing some people saying married couples should abstain from sex. And so I am just a little tired today, and I just all of a sudden I had a bit of a brain fart. I'm like, what was this? How did this relate to what she was saying a second ago? So that there were some people who were choosing not to have sex. They thought it made them holier, and then there's this competitive thing going on, right? Like, well, we can abstain from sex, and so what's wrong with you? Also, some people did start castrating. Some men, people with penises and testes, did start castrating themselves because of what's said in Matthew 19:12. So yes, some people did take that command from Paul seriously. Not everybody did. So it isn't a blanket thing. It's there were probably pockets of people or communities that took it more seriously than others. But one of my favorite details to back this up, like we don't see it or don't hear about it much, but the First Ecumenical Council in 325, the very first thing they addressed was to tell men to stop castrating themselves.
Mm.
And the way they did that was saying, if you've castrated yourself, you cannot be a leader in the church. So that's right. So that's this acknowledgement that these things that are in the letters and the gospels and whatever, some people are taking it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it was an across the board, no Christian was allowed to marry, like that kind of a thing. That wasn't happening, because there were people who were Christian who were also married or getting married. They weren't all leaving their marriages just because they became a Christian, that kind of a thing, right?
You know, with all of the sex scandals and sex abuse in the church, maybe castration should be a requirement for being an elder or a leader in the church.
No, totally. I mean, it's worth proposing. And, honestly, I know we're laughing about it, but the whole thing, yeah, well, there is that. And this is a good point, Logan, right? Some people say that is why Paul said that, or that is why Jesus said to make yourself a eunuch, so that you're not bringing more people into the world. You're just focusing on like attending to the end times or whatever. I don't think that's all that's going on. And that's, and the most apocalyptic stuff from Paul is the early stuff. He loses it over, as he continues on, and the end doesn't come, like he becomes less and less apocalyptic. Shoot, there was something else I wanted to say about that, but go ahead. I'll come back.
Well, I was going to completely change the topic. So if you've got one more thought on that one before we move on, go ahead.
Okay. So in all seriousness, it's tragic to me, because all of these ideas about repressed sexuality and negative valuation of bodies is a part of why so many people in churches, and perhaps even more so within leadership in churches, have such dysfunctional, and therefore which ends up playing out in really harmful and awful ways. I've had several people push back when I say something like that. They'll say, no, I think it's because the church tends to draw this type of person who is a pedophile, or it tends to draw this kind of person. And I'm like, yeah, I think we are underestimating the power of telling people they have to repress sexuality for those who are sexual. I think we are very, very much underappreciating how powerful that is, and therefore how messed up it gets, because it needs to come out somehow. It needs to be expressed somehow, and you're not allowing it in any kind of healthy way. 1900 years of that, right? So like the sex scandals doesn't, none of it surprises me, right?
Mm-hmm. It's just like abortion,
Say more about how that's the same.
The believers in, especially the more evangelical, are so against it, and they don't want it allowed under any circumstances. But then when you look at the stats, they have more abortions than unbelievers do.
Exactly, because unbelievers are trying to access birth control.
Right.
This is totally random, but I just heard on NPR today, they were interviewing a woman who did a historical novel, and she was looking into the Puritan culture in the 18th century, 16th, 17th, 18th century. And she's like, oh yeah, 1 in 4 out of 10 children, pregnancies were started outside of wedlock. Even within the Puritan culture. I'm like, well, of course. You repress something doesn't mean it's just fully repressed. It's going to come out in a different way. Anyway, I don't know if that little anecdote connected. I meant for it to, but anyway, yes.
Purple Rhymes with Orange has an interesting comment. Sex is the most basic natural instinct. In many species, it even takes priority over self-preservation, which makes sense from a biological and evolutionary standpoint, because perpetuating the species is more important than self-survival.
Exactly. Yeah. And it is a basic for those who have it, right? I think it's important just to keep saying it that way. Yeah, it is quite basic and natural if you have it. And it just drives me crazy how many people are not taught to talk about it with any kind of natural, normal, healthy, this is a part of life kind of language.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Comment that I've been holding, which is going to turn us to the next topic.
Okay.
WTF is so shameful about homosexual interactions.
Exactly. Exactly. Where's the threat here, right? Yeah. Where's the threat in that, right?
Yeah. And that was the other point from the book that I really wanted to discuss was
Great.
you talk about how homosexuality isn't really forbidden because it's a immoral practice, but rather it's a social, it's a violation of social standards.
Yes.
Go
Yes.
ahead and tell us about that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's important. And again, I feel like I'm saying things that a lot of people have heard, perhaps. I don't want to. So,
Not really. This was a
okay.
new
Okay.
idea to me.
Okay. Well, one of the things I think is important to note first is what we see in the Bible is a condemnation of an act, not a condemnation of a sexual orientation. So, right, because I even had someone recently say this, clarify something for me on one of my videos, and she said, I'm a bisexual woman married to a man. He is heterosexual. I'm bisexual. We look like a heterosexual couple, but we're not, because I'm not. So she said, I like to talk about hetero presenting. I was like, oh, that's such a great, thank you. That's a helpful thing. Who knows who any of these people in the Bible actually were in terms of their sexual orientation or sexual desires? All we know is what's being spoken of and talked about, which is an act, right? And so marriage happens because a man claims a woman by having sex with her. That's all that's talked about. So the Bible it doesn't talk about sexual orientation. It can't. We didn't have that even as a framework for a framework for talking about humans until the mid-19th century, right? To talk about an orientation was a new thing. There were plenty of men in Greek cultures who had women, took a woman, had a wife in our language, and then they also were having sex with men on the side, and there wasn't a label saying, "Oh, he's a bisexual." It's just a man was having sex with various people, right? The concept of an orientation is we see it happening, but there wasn't necessarily that we know of labels for it yet. So then on to your questions. So what we see, for instance, in Leviticus 18:20 and Leviticus 20:13, we see one verse that says, a man shall not lie with a man as he lies with a woman. It is an abomination. And one of them says, we're going to put you to death. This is really coming out of a framework of thinking about, first of all, sex is something that a man does to a woman or to an inferior. Thus, the way, and not just within the biblical framework, but also in ancient writings, the male is active and the female is passive. It's actually interesting how many people still think of it that way. A man is doing all the work and the woman's just sitting there. And how many times have you seen that portrayed? Because a woman's just like, get it over with. Come on. So the framework or the language is talked about that way, that the man is the active one. The female is a receptacle and is passive. Therefore, this becomes foundational to defining masculinity. The way a man, and I'm just going to use this language, and I hope you and your listeners will keep in mind. I don't think of us as dualists, I think of us as humans on a spectrum and all of that. But the language that we see in the ancient world is very dualistic, right? So I'm echoing their language, not the way I think about humans. So a man is a manly man if he is powerful and if he can be violent and if he can conquer or, take over, dominate. These are all parts of being a man. It's very toxic masculinity foundation, 101, right? And so those two verses in Leviticus are really talking more about aside from the thing that we need to be procreating, they're also talking about the fact that a man would never allow himself to be penetrated like a woman. That is an abomination.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
is, you're not a real man. I mean, I cringe every time I hear someone talk about being a real man, right? But this is thousands of years old. This
Mhm.
isn't just a recent thing, right? So, yes, I think those 2 in Leviticus are also a little bit about we need to procreate, but it is more about the shame of a man being soft or passive in a sex act. No man would allow himself to be treated that way. Go ahead. You're gonna say
So
something.
it was perfectly acceptable for a man to have sex with a male slave
Oh,
because
yeah.
the slave was an inferior,
Correct.
and so that was not considered
Exactly.
nothing wrong with that.
Right. A man has sex with a to it does sex to a woman or to an inferior. Yes. Yes. And so there that's, you might see in particular New Testament studies, they do a lot of conversation about honor shame, that
Mhm.
kind of a framework. And that is very much entwined like what's going on here, right? Anything about being a dominant, powerful, whatever male that makes you a real man. That is very much what's going on there. And so I do sometimes just as a shorthand do say that what we're seeing there is a form of homophobia, even though they didn't have that language. They didn't have that way of
Mhm.
thinking about it. They're terrified of a man enjoying that. Sorry. Anyway.
Logan Fisher says, "I could be tempted by an incubus or a succubus."
Wait. Oh, you could I know he's playing, but I'm like, "Wait, what are you saying? I could be tempted by an incubus or succubus?"
Mark Caesar has a really good comment. He says, "So why then did God make the G spot up the ass then?"
Exactly. Exactly. Because these guys hadn't discovered it yet, and they're terrified of enjoying something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, did that answer your question, or did I get
Yes.
did I
Yes.
get into yeah, yeah.
You got it exactly right on the head.
Okay. All the violence, war, real man stuff, real manly men, right? All of it goes together. Excuse me. All of it is intertwined in these ancient frameworks about humanity and yeah, what's expected, socially expected.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
So from that framework then, female homosexuality would be perfectly acceptable.
Exactly. Who cares what 2 women are doing? 'Cause they don't threaten us at all. Or they do, and that's why we're just shutting them out and ignoring them, right? Either way you wanna look at that one.
Mhm.
Correct. Yes, women are yeah, how do 2 women do anything anyway together?
Now, like the harems, like
Mhm. Mhm.
it's kind of
Mhm.
hard to talk about this, because you look at the
Mhm.
Bible and David and Solomon all are
Mhm.
supposed to have had so many wives.
Correct.
Then when you look at what the historians say about David and Solomon, which
Totally.
is if David even existed at all, he didn't
Right?
have a great kingdom. He was just a small chieftain. And so, all these grandiose palaces and stuff that they talk about, none of this even existed.
Mhm.
But at least
Mhm.
in their minds it existed.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so would the women then be kind of expected to have sex with one another since you're only gonna have a night with hubby, maybe once a year?
Right? Or once every couple months or something? Yeah. I
Mhm,
mean, I would I personally don't wanna use the word expected. I would per se I it seems normal to me that there might be some coupling going on there between women in harems, just because you're yeah, for exactly that reason, but also you are each other's world, right? You're doing the thing together, right? I mean yeah.
and Logan Fisher has a very funny comment. "I swear I slipped in the Acropole because of the."
It was an accident. I feel like I need to get, like, some sort of Asherah pole, like,
Oh,
thing
that's a good idea.
in my office just to have, the icon of it in here somehow. I should probably
So
look
there
into
was a
that.
third tree in the garden that no one talks about.
The tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of the knowledge of sex. Oh, Asherah or whatever. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm. The Asherah pole. Um
And Beck says a real man will lick that thing.
No, so I don't know if you know this, Granny. I do a live stream 2 days a week and focus on passages that talk about sex or marriage or physical harm that involves intimate body parts. I don't want to say sexual assault because sex is good and assault is bad, and I don't want those to be together. And we read through Song of Solomon on Thursday, and I'd forgotten about the passage that's talking about, says something about channels, like, the man, referring to female body parts, right? And the footnote actually says the Hebrew here is uncertain. I'm like, really? Because I can think of a part of my body that might be referred to as a channel. I don't know. And it's basically seeing if I can find it. Yeah. A garden locked is my sister, my bride. Metaphorical. They're not actually married. A garden, right? Women, bodies, a garden locked, a fountain sealed. Your channel is an orchard of pomegranates with all choicest fruits. Henna with, I'm like, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Yeah, I don't think so. I think you got it right. Just right there. Yep. Just can't imagine, right? Men actually pleasuring a woman. So we got to act like we don't know what this is talking about. Anyway, that was a fun one to read through Song of Solomon.
That takes us to a couple of comments that I had been holding from way back earlier in the show.
Okay, great.
Which was Liz Allen said, I was under the impression from my Latin dictionary from college that vagina means cave and penis means tail. That said, are possibly there multiple meanings?
Thank you for that, Liz. And I should go look into that before I say that ever again.
And Logan Fisher dovetailed on that and said that would make sense that the beast was described with a tail like a cedar.
Right.
And Vice Rhino has pointed out that the tail in that passage in Job is likely referring to a penis. Okay. All right. So now what would you want people to take away from that as what should we as modern people take with regards to how we accept homosexuality based on what is in the Bible? Is it all just a bunch of garbage? What is your thinking in that regard?
I think that the Bible is not a good resource for anyone in terms of marriage or sexuality or healthy relationships. So that goes for heteros or hetero presenting. So anything that I think it's important to know that it is condemning sex acts. I think it's important to be clear that's what it is doing and nothing more. And that it is perhaps coming out of a framework of fearing and this ancient, horrific, toxic masculinity thing going on, right? I think it's important to know that. But in terms of it saying to LGBTQ folks or gay, lesbian, bisexual, whatever, is it saying anything, that's where I would say, let's actually be honest and talk about this whole thing about Jonathan's love for David and that David seems to actually reciprocate it. And to talk about that, it's not sex specifically. So that's not helpful, but I think it can be. So anything here's the thing that is interesting to me and I think is related to your question. You don't have to be in a Christian family, or you don't have to attend church to be influenced by this idea that of sex defining marriage, right? So the whole conversation about marriage, which is what the book is talking about, is actually grounded in who is allowed to have sex and can it be procreative. I think that is an important piece to come to terms with and to wrestle with and and look at for yourself, even in secular spaces. I just, back to your earlier comments, Granny, sex is for more than procreation. Sex is obviously essential to procreation, but it is for more than that, right? It doesn't have to always be that, even for hetero presenting couples. So you know, I think my thought for LGBTQ community is I want to protect those people because there's
Mhm.
nothing helpful here. There's a lot of judgment. I don't want to defend the Bible. I don't want to make it okay. I don't want to make, well, no, it's really awful in these few places. It is. Let's just name it and tell people of faith or not. And that is on them, right? That is harmful. Those are underinformed. That's the word I like to use. That's an underinformed view of human sexuality. And I am very sad that it has been canonized, right? So that so many
Mhm.
people have been informed by it, but it is harmful thinking. We need to challenge it.
And it is very much an issue because we have a right wing that is in power. I mean, even the Speaker of our House right now is a young earth creationist, a
Yes.
biblical literalist.
Scary. Yep.
Yeah, and they want to, they want to start by making abortion illegal
Mm,
for
mm,
all women, all
mhm,
time.
mhm,
And as soon as they're done with that, they're going to
mhm,
go after the transgender community.
mhm.
And as soon as they're done with that, they're going to go after the gay community.
I think so. Yes.
Because
Mhm,
really the goal is to force their religion on all of us.
mhm, mhm. You
And
know, mm,
what do we do?
yeah. One of the things, I mean, the thing is, between now and the next election, there's not a lot you can do to re-educate, right?
Mhm,
That's not gonna happen. That doesn't
mhm,
happen in a time of pressure. Re-education or
mm,
enlightening people happens when they have some space to consider. So, in terms of righting the ship or addressing, no, that, what I have found is helpful on some level is showing someone how the scriptures that they believe say X, show them how something else challenges that.
mm, mhm,
So, I don't think I'm ever gonna be able to get someone like him to reconsider Genesis 2:24 actually isn't talking about marriage. Like, I don't think I'm gonna get that across, even though it really isn't, and that's part of the problem. But we can't have something else within the same thing that challenges some of the beliefs that they have. Um, no, because I remember I did a presentation at a Unitarian church one time, and uh, in in preparing for that, I remember thinking about the Psalm 139. God knows our inner parts and inner being, and before I was born, God knew. And I was like, yeah, but what if you read that as God knew that who you were on the outs God knew that you were gonna be trans and that you're like, I don't want this to be I don't actually believe in God, like, I don't believe in this. But,
yeah,
you can say that being that trans person is a part of who you were from the beginning also. Like, that doesn't
mm,
like, you can flip the same you can use a passage that says, "Well, you were born a female genitalia, you're female." Yeah, but they were born with all these other things inside, and that is true and real. I don't know if I'm making sense right now, but
yeah, you
I
are.
mean, but people aren't gonna hear that in the next 10 months. So what do we
True.
do is a really important question, though.
I'm beginning to think that the most important thing we can do is exactly what you are doing,
Mm,
which is teaching the next generation.
yeah, that's kinda yeah, mhm.
Now, I know some of your students are believers.
Mhm, mhm.
How do they take to what you have to teach?
Um, it's a little bit easier when you do, say, an intro to the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, but I
Mhm,
do have a lot of like, I continually name where I think believers are coming from, and I name what I'm assuming they think and believe, and then I say, "And okay, but now let's consider this." And so it's harder to do in the format I'm doing it now, which is fully online and asynchronously. Like, I don't ever see their faces, right? That is
mm,
is hard, but I
mm,
do try to name stuff up front, remind them this isn't attacking them and their faith. It might feel that way, but let's just consider some new ideas. I always bring in every syllabus I've written since graduate school. I've used that paraphrase of It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain an idea without accepting it. And
Mhm.
I have them talk about that in a discussion thread, like, what does that mean for this class? Like, you can have beliefs that aren't what we're talking about. And can you
Mhm.
just, we're not trying to challenge those, but they, like, what does that look like? How do you set aside your beliefs long enough to hear a new perspective? That kind of thing. And one of the things that's been really important for me, Granny, is I used to be an evangelical,
Mhm.
and I don't want to be a liberal evangelical. I want to be a person who presents some information, and what people do with it is just not, it's not my business really, unless they ask me into that process. But most people don't, right? Most people have their own people or their own thing, and that's fine, right? So I think that that's also important piece of it. It's not right. It's not, I, it's bigger than me. It's beyond me. It's not, so I don't need anyone to think or believe anything in particular.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
I would love it if they did, but that's not how it works. And it's not how the process worked for me.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, I was more thinking in terms
Mm.
of,
Oh, okay.
when students come in with a evangelical frame of mind,
Mhm.
and you present to them things like this, that, how awful biblical marriage is,
Mm.
are they able to, even though they still hold to their faith, are they able to let go of portions of it that maybe are more problematic?
So both things will happen. There will be people who, when I get to something that's just a little bit too personal or too close to whatever for them, they just shut down and stop hearing.
Mhm.
But that is rare. It is usually at the undergraduate level, it is more common that they will start to see it and start to either be grateful and, like, relieved or just kind of like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much. This is overwhelming to me." And they're just talk about it in the discussion, and that's what it's there for, is to help them have an outlet for it and to, like, get it out and, like, talk about it. And I've had a few, and it's really only been a few in 20 years, remove themselves from the course
Mhm.
because it was too much and they could see where
Mhm.
it was heading for them.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that, you know what? I respect that. I respect that they weren't ready, or that just isn't okay for them right now or ever. It really made me sad when someone did it in in-person class. She removed herself from a class, yeah, over the break because she was back with her Greek Orthodox family, and it was too much for her. And she needed
Mm.
her family. She needed her family more than she needed this education, in a
Yeah,
sense, on
yeah.
that level. Yeah.
And that's one thing I find really sad,
Mhm.
is the family pressure that comes.
Mhm.
I was very fortunate. I came from a family that was always half and half.
Mm.
And so when I switched from being probably the most obnoxious adherent to evangelicalism to
Mm.
being an atheist, I didn't have to, even though I had to explain it to my
Ah.
family,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't like my family was like, "Oh, you're leaving us." It
Yeah.
was, "Oh, you're switching from camp A to camp B."
Right? You just hang out with different family members at the
Right,
reunions. Yeah.
right.
That is kind of nice. You didn't
Mhm.
lose your people, your network, your family.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and not everybody is in that kind of a situation.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
And the one I was the most fortunate with is my husband,
Mm.
because my husband is still a believer.
Hmm.
But we had been married for 38 years when I
Mm.
quit believing.
Mhm.
But what really I find most interesting is that now he actually has his Christianity the way he always wanted it instead of the way I had wanted it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mhm.
He's a
And
little less intense. Is that what
yeah,
you're saying? Yeah.
but when we were first married, we would go to church and it's, "Okay, we need to get involved in this and this and this and this, and we need to be here on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night." I wanna do choir, I wanna, what
Uh-huh.
committees are we gonna sign up for?
Uh-huh.
And he's, "Can't we just be pew sitters?" It's like, "No, no, that's not what it's all about. We gotta, full in." So when I gave up, and went atheist, he's now a pew sitter, what he always
Yeah.
wanted in the first place.
Nice. Nice. Good for him. That's nice. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We are almost out of time, so I was
Yes.
gonna bring up one final topic, but I don't know that we really have any time to give it justice, but I'll throw it out just real quick, and that
Sure.
is we discussed it very briefly before the show, was, one place in the book you talked about the mystery.
Mm.
In Ephesians, it talks about, when a man is joined to a woman in marriage, this is a great mystery. And I immediately related that to Dr. Richard Carrier's book, Jesus from Outer Space, mostly because I had just finished reading that.
Gotcha.
And
Mhm.
he talks about that he is of the opinion that Christianity may have started as a mystery cult, and that the whole thing of Christianity was to get a revelation of a mystery from God and then be able to explain these mysteries to other people, and the whole point of being a part of being a Christian was to learn the mysteries of God.
Mhm.
Do you think that relates to what you were talking about?
Let's see if I can do this. As you said, we don't have a lot of time, but one of the things is I differ from Richard Carrier on how we read the, where Christianity started, how it began, and I read Paul differently than he does from what you have just said.
Mhm,
And so Paul talks about the early church groups as ecclesia, which is a political term. It's a term for a social group or a political group, and that's what he called them. And so there's nothing mysterious about that. But we do start to get that kind of language in the book of Ephesians, which is 20, 30 years after Paul's gone, someone's writing in his name. And we do have this kind of more spiritual language going on in Colossians and Ephesians. And when, I'm trying to address your question specifically. I do think that there's an kind of one of the subsets or one of the small groups of Christianity, because there were all kinds of groups, even by the end of the first century, that identified with Christianity that looked very different from each other and believed very differently from each other. So there may have been some who did treat it much more like a mystery cult, and that there was special
mm,
knowledge that you
mhm,
needed to have. And there's this I don't think that's what the language of Ephesians specifically is talking about, but I can see why that could have perhaps been taken farther, right, by
mhm,
some groups.
mhm.
The mystery of Christ in the church, I think, is actually just an off the top of the head spinning of language and ideas. Um, do you wanna I don't know how much you want me to say about all of that. So,
I'm gonna
um
let you finish that thought, and
oh,
then we've got 2 questions we need to get to,
great.
so we'll
Okay,
go
great.
over time just a bit.
I think, okay, um, I'm just gonna say this. My mother, I reference her in that chapter.
Mhm,
She's a pastor, Methodist pastor, and she said to me a couple times, "I just don't think the person who wrote that, like, had it all figured out ahead of time." And she's not being disrespectful. She's like, it doesn't flow. It doesn't make sense to me." And I actually think the more I studied that passage, I've done a couple commentaries on Ephesians. I just think it was more like they were getting caught up in the terminology and the metaphors and all this stuff. And because the way they use the term mystery, mysterion, elsewhere in the letter is entirely different. This is a
mm,
singular usage of the word
mhm,
mysterion in the entire Newer Testament. And I
mhm.
just think it came out of this like poetic whatever, whatever, building up of thoughts and whatever. And then we go back to this other thing. And it just so happens that then became foundational for sacramental language in the church for the next, 1500 years. So there's that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if I addressed your question, but
Oh, yeah,
a little bit.
I think you did very well.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, 2 questions.
Hey,
Nadia
Nadia.
asks, "Am I correct that the fundy's intentions are comprehensively mass imprisoning all
Mm.
trans people and Mengele-style forced surgically reversing their medical transitions?" Quotes abound. I am
Wow.
not aware of it being that extensive. If that is in fact the goal, I am not aware of it. Dr. Bird?
I'm not either, though I have to be honest and say, unfortunately, it doesn't terribly surprise me if that's where they're headed. given the language and the judgment and the fear of such humans that I hear people talking about, and it just is terrifying. Yeah.
I had a transphobe on as a guest,
Ah,
and
wow.
the transgender woman assisted me with that show,
Wow.
and she was extremely polite to this
Wow.
god-awful guest. And at the end of the show, we got nowhere with her. And I really wish we could have made some headway, but she was just fully convinced that if transgender people are allowed to be themselves, that that is somehow a threat to her, and we could not convince her otherwise.
Yeah. Definitely not in that setting, you know? Yeah. But that's impressive that she came on to try to
Yeah. And Nadia, thank you very much for the super
Yes.
chat.
Yeah.
Okay, and we have a question from Lone Wanderer. Dr. Bird, in your opinion, how prevalent is sexual repression in the Bible? Are there any passages that encourage sexuality?
So let me say that encouraging sexuality, I do think that is part of why Song of Solomon, someone made sure it was in there, regardless of its usage, whether it was for the worship of Asher or not. I don't know. I trust that some people have suggested that, and I haven't seen it for myself. But I do think that that does encourage it. It's still not very deep. It's a very shallow sexuality. It's very lustful and visual, and that's okay too. It's not a complex sexuality, is my point. But I think it's lovely, and in terms of what it opens up and allows for. Are there others though that encourage sexuality? Not that I can think of. And your question is so interesting. I'm going to scroll back up to it in the comments because I think that's a really interesting. Let's see. Must have been way back there. How much repression is that? Is that what the question was? How much repression is there in the Bible?
Yeah, unfortunately, I took that off.
No,
so
that's okay. That's okay. I was just thinking I could scroll back and find it. That's a very interesting way of putting it, to be honest. What I think is that the Bible talks about sex as something very perfunctory, something that men get to do, as I've said, something that is about territory, marking territory. It is about procreation. And so we just don't see any kind of playfulness talked about. We don't see any kind of understand your own body so you know what you like and you can communicate it to your partner. Like there's none of that going on, right? So I think that it is all repressive, except for the one time in Song of Solomon that just celebrates it. Is that? Yeah. I mean, I think
that's fair. I think that's fair. Okay, so the book we have been discussing, let's see. The green screen is taking it out.
Is messing with, yes.
Marriage in the Bible by Dr. Jennifer Bird. There is a link in the description to the Amazon copy. And there is also a link in the description to Dr. Bird's website. And you can look up some of her other books on the website as well. But I highly recommend this book for letting people know just what marriage in the Bible really is, and that it really is that bad, and it really is not something that anyone should desire or be trying to force on us.
Yes. Thank you.
You are most welcome. Okay, coming up next week, Saturday, there will not be a stream on Saturday. Instead, I will be doing Purple's Christmas Marathon, and I will be streaming on the 25th on Monday from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Jenny Morgan will be on with me, as will Beck. So that is what's coming up next week. And the following week will be Sergeant Skeptic. He was supposed to be last week, but we had to reschedule him, and he will be December 30th. And so with that, thank you, all of you, for your comments and your questions, and especially thank you to you, Dr. Bird, for coming. This has been enlightening and informative, and it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.
Live your life.